Perfect. Michelle, first and foremost, thank you so much again for this opportunity. And HR Rebels, thank you again for allowing me to share this time with you. Hopefully, I don't disappoint too much, but I'll try and keep everybody engaged and active. And as I'm going through this, feel free to ask questions, make comments. The goal here is to be interactive. I want to do as little as talking to you as I want to do as talking with you. So again, thank you for this opportunity, Michelle, uh, as well. Thank you again. As Michelle mentioned, uh, presenting on intentional culture across global teams, maintaining that, growing that. It's a very it's a it goes without saying. We're in a global environment. I don't think there's any, very fewer and fewer examples of just purely domestic teams, organizations. And so, especially with the advent of AI, we're going to really have to kind of, think more broadly. And so, what I want to cover with the team today is, around maintaining an intentional culture around global teams. We want to start first with a reality check. What's actually going on? What will we have to actually deal with maintaining culture across global teams? And then I want to provide a framework that would help, in practical terms, the audience think about that. And I'll touch on a case study of bad practice, a case study of good practice, and then I'll touch a little bit about listening at scale, how Intramark could potentially help with that. But more importantly, at the end, open it up just to discussion. Now, before I jump in, why is this important? So, maintaining culture across global teams is about maintaining consistency. If we think about operational excellence, driving consistency and predictability across an organization, culture is going to be one of the pillars that helps drive that. So, as leaders, as managers of organizations, having unpredictability in different pockets leads to just inconsistency in results, whether it be financial or growing talent. And so, having a standard practice across the globe that an organization can agree to is going to be super critical. A unifying culture, a unifying battle cry, if you will, that an organization aligns to. Again, streamlines decision making, fairness when it comes to incentives across geographies, and cohesion. And all of that just brings intangible value that translates into the bottom line and the top line. So this is why it's important. Um, let's jump with first my background. Why me? Why should I be talking about this? Now, I am not an expert in maintaining global culture, but I have some experience, and so some of that experience that makes me relevant for this conversation is I spent some time working based in China, working for PwC, focused on Chinese tech companies going public in the U.S. But as part of that experience, I got to see PwC's culture in New York, and then got to see PwC's culture in Shanghai, and really how that consistency was maintained in two very different geographies. So I had a very interesting experience of, okay, wow, interesting. PwC feels very consistent as it did in New York, as it does in Shanghai. And we'll kind of touch into some of those best practices on what did they do to make that true. And we'll get into some nuances with PwC that makes it very interesting as well. I also spent some time with Samsung in Korea. So again, based in Korea, Samsung is a Korean company. As part of that program, we were based in headquarters in Korea. Global company with, we know Samsung for its phones, but it does washing machines. It does biotech manufacturing. It used to produce cars at some point. Samsung just it did, does everything. And so it has global competitors, but a very, very controlled cultural environment despite the regions. And so Samsung, how it operates and likes to operate is it has a Korean boss for whatever region in the geography that it's operating. And that's kind of part of its cultural norm, cultural operations. It likes to kind of maintain control very directly from the an HQ perspective, and that has some benefits and also some consequences. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. Um, some other experiences, done extensive projects in the UK, Indonesia, Turkey. And again, so hopefully I bring some relevance in, being able to broach this topic with this audience. Any questions? I want to make sure that I don't talk at everybody. All right, I'll take silence as a no. So let's do a reality check. Oh, sorry, I heard a question. John? Oh, sorry. Perfect. Let's do a reality check, right? So our scenario, let's call ourselves Acme Corp. We're a global company. We're headquartered in the US. Let's call it New York, but we have operations everywhere. Now, us sitting in the US, we have expectations that, yes, the culture that we want to build to grow and grow our talent, drive consistency in operations, predictability in decision making. All of those things stem from having a consistent and the right culture. All of that we're building in the U.S. But as we look geographically in different regions are kind of starting to adopt their own cultures, norms, again, driven by internal and external factors, competition to just cultural norms that are normal in each region. And so as we start to think about, as we grow more, what are some of the challenges that we can expect, right? So culture doesn't scale automatically, right? We have to be intentional about this. We can't just let it loose. Some factors that are going to be working against us are distance, the growth rate, and time zones, right? And time zones and distance kind of play together. But more specifically, challenges that we can expect are, you could read the slides for yourself, but I think the two buckets here that matter a lot are incentives and visibility. I think without the right incentives and the right visibility, trying to maintain consistency, intentional culture around for global teams is going to be, even more of a challenge. But we have other things like alignment, and then managers are going to be the linchpins on whether or not that consistency is maintained internationally and globally. And so really thinking about incentives around managers, because they're going to be the linchpin, in addition to more broadly, but also visibility around managers. Are managers actually acting and espousing the culture that we want? So the question is, how do we get visibility into that? How do we get consistent visibility into that? That's been typically a challenge. That and bad incentive design. And so we'll touch a little bit more about that a little bit later. But are there any other areas I'm missing? These are the ones that I thought of based on my experience. I'd like to open it up and ask, what are some potential other areas of challenges that we can expect?
Culture.
Yes, these are all impacting culture.
Yeah,
but even like local culture, like when you're in different countries, you have local culture.
Yep.
Yeah, I was also going to say your HRIS. I deal with this on a pretty regular basis, that everything works for the US, automated and auto assignments and all that stuff. And then for everyone who is not in the US, it's a manual process to add a new hire, to add them into the system, their employee number, process payroll. It's all 2, 3, 4, 5 extra steps. And I'm sure that's frustrating for the team.
So friction with systems, right? So if we think about systems and being able to do things efficiently, we're going to run into those frictions, potentially internationally than we are. Again, a lot of these tools, if we're a US-based company, we're Acme Corp. A lot of the tools or software we're going to buy are going to be from other potentially US-based firms, tailored to US-based firms. then we got to deal with those system issues internationally. And that's going to hurt visibility. That's going to hurt efficiency. It's going to hurt communication, which I think is another big bucket here as well.
Even to piggyback off Danielle is processes. So I had a client, they were in Korea, they had US operations, and their like processes worked in Korea, but then they implemented them here in the US, and it was like really handcuffing the team in the US to be able to like make decisions and be able to do things. So just like the process was limiting and affecting the culture.
Was it Samsung by chance?
It was Acme Corp.
Very well done. Very well done.
I would another comment. The only thing I would say, other than the cultural paradigm between countries and the U.S. or anywhere, is we're assuming our processes actually work here, when in fact that's not true most of the time when it comes to people. And I would say that's an issue, a stumbling block when you start expanding globally and use your own systems, when in fact, the reality check is to do that without actually investigating and knowing what you're doing and how it actually works.
So John, what you're saying is, and what I picked up on was, first, let's not assume our systems are working here, let alone, whether or not they would work elsewhere. And so let's figure out what we're doing here first, before we make the decision to implement culture or systems elsewhere, which I think is a great point, right? Like, before you drive cultural, consistency across global teams, we first want to drive consistently good culture, right? So first determining if we have good culture first.
And the processes that support them. Danielle mentioned that, and I can only tell you that by and large, and anyone is free to argue with me, we have created a monster when it comes to large systems and our applicant tracking systems, or HRIS, or whatever you want to call it. And now we've added another layer between the people and the actual doing, called AI. And we have some real challenges in getting that message, not only to our own people in our own country, wherever that is, but especially here, and scale that out in an understandable, embracing way to other countries.
John, I really like that. One, adding the layers. One, AI is another layer, but systems being a layer that does impact culture. How we are able to do things influence how we decide to go about doing things. And so whether or not there's a lot of friction may cause people to, quality may shift with how much friction is in the system or not. So I like that. Any other comments?
Yeah, I've got a few. Sorry. So one of the things that used to come up all the time. So I'm from England, if you can't tell by my accent. But one of the things that used to come up all the time is that we'd have Americans coming over and telling us we were going to do something in a particular way, which actually conflicted with local legislation. And when you tried to explain this to them, they would tell you why you were wrong, because this is their company and they'll do it the way they want it done, instead of the way that actually is legally allowed to be done in that country. So legislation differences is for sure. And then language as well. On this, similarly, we'd have Americans coming over and they just didn't understand what we meant when we said, well, that's very interesting. They thought we were interested. We weren't remotely interested, as an example. And there was all sorts of other things like that where we may all be speaking English, but we meant one thing very clearly and they didn't get it, or they meant one thing and we didn't get it. So it works both ways, right?
Yeah. I like that a lot. Just, the level of how passive some cultures are versus others. You know, I could, from my own experience, right? You know, working in Asia, not always direct as, let's say, perhaps like you know, potentially a German, you know, German culture. Germans may be a lot more direct. Americans somewhere in the middle. But you know, that's interesting is something I actually say when I don't necessarily agree with something, but I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna think about it. So I like that. It's something that relates with me quite a bit. But if no other additional comments, I'll move on. But
Yeah,
anyone else want to?
I've got one
Absolutely.
quick comment. I come from the sales and marketing world, and I've been in a lot of different things in HR tech and also in real estate. And I found that particularly Asian culture tends to, how do I want to say it so it sounds okay, mask their fluency in English as a negotiating tactic. And
Mm,
that creates some challenges because, you know, especially if it's an organization that has a family in it, generational, you know, the oldest person kind of pretends not understand, but usually that's the smartest person in the room. And they've often got a doctorate or an MBA from a US university, but they let their nephew or their niece do all the talking, and it is a disarming tactic. It really is.
which raises a very, very important point, right? How do you drive global consistency or cultural consistent intentional culture consistently across global teams when you're serving different customers, right? There are different, you know, negotiation tactics, different, you know, ways of doing business that, you know, systems and culture should customize for that local group to get things done. And that kind of relates with the optimization bucket. You know, regions adapt to culture to survive, not align. And so if you were to survive in a region, there's going to be some adaptations. There's going to be some cultural variance. And I think that's something that is okay, is to understand how much of the culture do we want to be consistent and non-negotiable? And then what are some parts of the subculture within our organization that we should allow and encourage to have variation? And how do we clearly document that? Which is, which bleeds us into the framework, right? Again, so how do we balance this global intentional culture that we want to build, but also accommodate local realities? And so my pillars, just from my observations overseas, this is just kind of what I would do, right? You know, what we should do as a group, expanding Acme Corp internationally. I think first, codify. Um, uh, I believe it was Bill. You said I may say something, Americans may take it a different way. In addition to that, you know, here are the rules, and you know, of my country. Here's not. I think with all of that, codifying that is going to be a very important. There's nothing different. You know, there's nothing more powerful than having something written on paper and aligned on so that it could be referenced to. I think what typically happens with, at least from my observation, is companies expand. They don't really create that local framework. Or let me, the word I'm looking for is it's oh, there's a word I'm looking for. I don't want to say constitution, but there's got to be a local terms of agreement.
Agreement.
Something like that. Yeah, a terms of agreement that is local, that is published, and that is detailed. I think often organizations kind of lean on the poster on the wall, like you like to say, Michelle, of the values, and they expect that to translate locally. But I think each local environment should have its own codified, basically local terms of agreement. So that translate, you know, what does ownership look like rather than, you know, are you taking ownership, and really start to codify these different things. So local terms of agreement, I think, is the first bucket that we should do as Acme Corp as we expand. Is if we expand into China, we're going to have a local terms of agreement. On the top are our global values, and kind of cascading below that are the local values that we have flexibility on that are necessary. But having that published, having that explicit, having that agreed on is a very powerful driving factor to get alignment locally that cascades globally. Any comments on that first bucket?
Can I share a story? When I was
Absolutely.
when I was at Access Communications, this was something they did really, really well. And I probably took it for granted at the time until I left and worked for a company that did not have this together. They were a global company and they had two things that were really important to them. And you could travel anywhere in that company and you were at Access, at any of their offices. One, you had to speak English at every single office. So when you were communicating over email or communicating in their chat channels or communicating, that was the language they preferred. So that you had to be able to speak English so that you can communicate with everybody, right? So you weren't shutting people out across the organization. The second one was their values. And they harped on it. And it's to the point where it was painful. And it wasn't to just like push it down to people, but it was really to codify it across the organization. And it was part of everything they did. It was brought up at the executive level. It was part of their hiring. It was on their onboarding. They brought all their new hires to Sweden and they walked them through the values. They walked them through how those values played into decision making. And like it cost a lot of money for them to do that. And then in all of their sales kickoffs every year, that was a big piece of their sales kickoff training was their values and how that impacted their cultural norms across the organizations, not just in the US or the UK or in Brazil or in China, across the whole organization. So it made them feel like one unit, even though we were all over the world.
Michelle, what you just, this ties right into bucket number two. It's communicate by saying the same thing 5 times. And by 5 times, I don't mean literally, probably it's more like 10, 20, 30 times. When I was at another tech firm, the CEO the then CEO, he was popular for saying something to the effect of you have to repeat, 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 repeat. I think some of the challenges that organizations run into is that they'll send one email or a communication and expect it to sink in. Employees typically don't think you're serious about something unless it's repeated about like 10 times. Once it's repeated about 10 times, then I think at the 10th time is kind of like, okay, well, at this point, if this doesn't sink in for me and I operate differently, this is going to be a problem. And so I think it takes at least 5 to 10 times for that same message, same value to really seep in into culture. And I think, that missing piece that a lot of organizations have is that repeat, repeat, repeat of 13 times before you retain it. There you go, right? And so I think that's a general rule that I think the 13 number is a good hard number to really stick by. Is if you want culture to to align, change, or whatever it may be, expect to say that one thing, not a list of things, that one thing on that list 13 times, and then repeat for everything else that you want. So the communication piece, as far as the second pillar goes, is critical, and the takeaway there is you've got to repeat. You've got to get comfortable repeating until you just broken record. Any comments on that one?
I would say you also communicate through your actions, especially with culture,
Yep.
right? If you say, we respect people as one of your values, I'm just making this up, and then you treat people horribly, then what you're actually saying is you don't respect people. And so what you do and what you tolerate in your organization is actually your values.
Yeah.
And so you have to make sure that whatever you're codifying and communicating, that you're also communicating through what you're tolerating and celebrating in your organization, because that's also a mode of communication.
Well, more specifically, you don't respect them as individuals. and they take it very personally.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
This is a very, very good point. Is actions speak louder than words, right? And so, what the communication piece, and I added it down is, in addition to repeat, actions have to be consistent with what you're repeating, and what you enforce has to be consistent with what you're repeating. Otherwise, you could say it 20 times, and it's still, employees will see that it's not serious if it's not being followed with. So, Michelle, thank you for bringing that up. That action is a second piece to that communication piece, is that reinforcement, whether it be consequences or otherwise, or rewards, have to match what you're saying, which ties into the third bucket, is having those incentives match with what you're communicating, and reinforcements, super important. But also, one thing I've noticed in my global travels is leaders don't take enough time to craft and design incentives to align with the outcomes that they want. Generic bonus structures and 3% raises, the out of the box solution, I don't think is going to work for Acme Corp. Right. So as we're expanding into China, as we're expanding into Brazil, whatever it may be, we have to think about, okay, what do we need to design in an incentive system so that culture is naturally reinforced? People don't listen to, just general sayings. If it's backed up with money and incentives, that's going to align behavior quite a bit. And so really looking at incentive structures, and are people incentivized to follow culture as you've designed it? Do you have mechanisms within incentive structures to reinforce the cultural parameters that you're looking for, in the consistency that you're driving for? Any quick comments on the incentive bucket?
I
Uh,
have I have
yeah.
a comment. I'm so sorry. Hi, I have a comment, and this is I think this is it's going back to number two, but also relating to number three. And but I'm gonna touch bases on number two about the communication part and the constant repetition. Um, I'm I'm Hispanic, and I have worked in global organizations here in the US, and primarily one of the reasons why I have worked here is that I speak Spanish, and I have helped the Hispanic population in many organizations here, but also people working in Latin America. And one of the things that I experience sometimes, and this is just in the context of Hispanics, sometimes the information is not that it has to be repeated many times, but in the context of Latin speakers, the way you deliver communication, it's very important for them. So in Latin culture, one of the things that they love is like they don't respond very well to transactional tone. If you're like A, B, C, D, sometimes they will think, why are you talking so like punchy? It feels like punchy to me. It feels like you're giving me a punch. And so they don't respond to that. Oftentimes they rather softness and sweetness, and as long as you're more on the sweet side, they will respond well to you and get it at the first time. Now, and I go back to the context of communication, because it goes back to the context of, let's say, outcomes, right? And let's say compensation. If you have to deliver compensation, some people will take it very well, even if there's not like a lot of increase in money, just by the way in which you deliver the information. And the tone and the softness and kind of like the texture of your voice. But I just wanted to share that because I thought it kind of tied into both scenarios.
Ilian, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Because I didn't hear you say my name, but it's Lilian Caseros.
Lillian. Okay, Lillian, thank you so much for that comment, because that is, that's quite a valuable insight, right? Because how things, how communication is delivered, I think is another piece that I miss for sure. Not only is it repeated, not only if actions follow and it's reinforced, but how it's delivered, right? In the tone it's delivered, right? Is leadership delivering this in a transactional, self-serving manner? Is the perception of the communication transactional versus relationship building? Or, is the tone of a tone that I want everybody on the boat to be on the boat and rowing in the same direction versus this is what I need you to do, kind of type deal. And I think that's a very important component to communication that we could go deeper on. But really appreciate that comment.
Thank you.
Dominic, being a comp person primarily, incentives really hit close to home there. And one experience I had in designing sales incentive plans based upon American culture and values, and then taking that to Japan. And, and the Japanese are very cordial in their acceptance. And I put in an incentive plan that incentivizes the individual. And the Japanese culture, individuals don't really want to stand out. And the end result is after we paid the incentives, when one employee received 100, another one 50, another one 200, that they would go to dinner after they got their paychecks, put all the money in the middle of the table and divide it evenly because their culture is they sold as a team. And so while they adapted very quickly to the systems, but culturally it didn't fit for them.
Robert, what a great point, right? Again, this is where the number one codify comes in, right? How do you have a global culture that you want to drive towards, but have the local realities come through, and have a codification that accounts for that. So, in Korea, promotions and salary is largely based on tenure, and less so on merit. That's at least when I was there, right? So if things, so the longer you were at the company, that typically dictated your title and your compensation. So it's less so about performance reviews. It was more so about tenure. And then, Robert, what you mentioned with Japan being more of a collectivist society, not wanting to stand out. Very, very interesting story and very real story of that team pulling the money together and dividing things equally, which is a very different concept than we have here in the U.S. And so again, I think acknowledging those local norms is super, super important, and they come out in real ways. But designing incentive structures that are appropriate for the local environment, but that still drive that culture, that consistency, for culture across is going to be super important. So, Robert, thank you for bringing that to the forefront. The last bucket or the last pillar is measure. So, as we codify, right, we have our terms of agreement that is guided by the global culture, but tailored to local customs. We're communicating that. We're not only repeating it, but we're also reinforcing it with actions and decisions, but we're also communicating in a way that is well received for that environment. So, we're doing those. Then we're also designing incentive structures that are aligned and really influence behavior in the way that we want to build culture. Lastly, we've got to have visibility on whether or not any of this is working and whether or not there's any culture drift. How do we get visibility? And one thing to add on the incentive side as well, designing incentives at the manager level correctly is going to be extremely important because they're the infrastructure to culture. Right, the people managers are going to be the infrastructure of culture. especially the middle managers. And so making sure that incentives are designed properly, especially at that level, is going to be super important. Then we've got to measure whether or not any of this is working, right? Where's culture drift happening? Is adherence to culture happening? What are some hot spots? What are some green spots? Where do we need to jump in? How do we get early visibility and visibility constantly? We have traditional means of doing that, but really thinking hard about what are some more timely, accurate ways that we could get visibility into measuring whether or not culture in each region is moving in the direction that we want, and all the hard work we've done around codifying, communicating, and incentivizing is actually working. Any comments there?
I actually think you could do step 4 first as well to get a baseline and capture some of these, especially if you're moving into some of these different countries where you might not know the norms, right? Capture some of those cultural norms or some of those things that might be different to understand before you codify, get some of that feedback, get the foundation, and then codify. So 4 might be one of those things that continuously evolves over time, or you continuously go back to like a measure and iterate.
I totally agree. How do we measure baseline and then go from there?
My comment would be emulate and copy those that are successful. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of people that operate internationally that have incredibly great success, and many that don't. And so whether or not you're going into a country with an EOR as your employer of record, for those that don't know, and I don't mean to speak down to anybody, but and you farm out your company to somebody else as your representative in of your company in that country, there are some things that have to be done correctly. And so do research. I saw a comment on benefits. It's probably one of the most peculiar things ever internationally is what we call benefits here. And emulate, talk to people, get a consultant in for God's sakes, and help you, like you, Dominique, help you traverse the travails of going international. That's my comment.
John, well said. Well said. I think leaning. Oops. Oh, okay. I think leaning on wisdom, leaning on best practices, learning from others' mistakes and successes is a lot cheaper way to go about this. The expensive way is to learn it on our own, right? Okay, we're Acme Corp. We're going out there. Do we want to learn these lessons ourselves, or do we want to just learn from some professor, right? My professor, i.e., some company that did this the wrong way and some company that did this the right way, and what can we draw from that? And then how do we pull in the right advisors, right, to help us guide our own nuances? And so there are general case studies that are out there of companies that did this well, companies that didn't do this well. Then how do we customize it for our own environment at Acme Corp and do this successfully? And I think that's where a consultant could be very helpful in tailoring what's worked generally to a very specific environment. So, John, really appreciate the comment there. Excellent. So
a good comment too in the chat, I lost it, from John about the benefits too. I think it's worth pointing out that incentivizing the wrong behavior can have a negative effect, right? If let me read it so I get it right. The flip side of the incentive pillar is to not tolerate unacceptable behaviors if they're not consistent with values. If those behaviors are tolerated and not acted upon, then the value becomes discredited.
100%. 100%, Michelle. This aligns with your comment earlier as well. It's we tolerating is permission in many ways. And so if we say one thing and we don't enforce it, employees kind of see that as a binary decision, a yes or no. And so there's no in between. And so it's either employees understand, yes, this is acceptable, no, this is not anything else. So being very firm with what you follow through with and hold people accountable to is going to be, and consistently, especially globally. And this relates to a question I have for the audience later as well, if we have time. The teaser there is, how do we manage situations where a certain behavior is rewarded in one environment or one culture, one business practice, but is penalized in another, right? How do we decide promotions but very interesting questions that we could get into. But thank you for Michelle for reading that comment and the comment as well. Let me just go into some, personal case studies, just based on my experience, and what I experienced of, when we talk about maintaining an intentional culture across global teams, what are some bad practices that I've seen that, again, just were not effective? And then we'll go into some good practices that I thought were pretty effective. I won't name names, but don't try and guess. I've worked for several global tech firms, so we're going to try and keep it as obfuscated as possible. But one global tech firm I worked for, we were part of a very specific group. This group was very very specific group, but it was operated very much so like a fiefdom. And so it was extremely isolated from the rest of the organization. This group was hyper, there's having your own culture, and then there's like really having your own culture. So it was very distinct, separate, not integrated to the rest of the organization. In a very interesting and very specific way. The leader there was often not, and this was before COVID, right? And so this was when people are in office, and so 99% of the team were in one location. The leader was not. This was before COVID. And so, but still a fiefdom, highly specific norms and incentives. So we're very separate from the rest of the organization. There was no feedback mechanism. There was not a suggestion box. There was not an annual survey. There was not anything. And so, for our specific group specifically, so it was really a black box. It was just this very isolated environment. And we had a few higher level leaders, not all of them. Most of them were great, but we had a few bad apples that were, and in that environment, it wielding that kind of power and recklessly is very, very complicated to navigate, right? So not having a feedback mechanism to get that out there, good or bad, that not even a suggestion box, right? Paper written, nothing. And there was intentional miscommunication, right? Because, part of this was in efforts to attract talent, some overpromising was made. And so this was just bad practice. This violates, codification. There was no real global understood way of doing things that aligned with the broader organization and its values. There was, again, not great communication generally, not, let's start with no feedback mechanism. Incentives were very specific. They weren't, in my opinion, weren't thoughtfully designed to drive a specific outcome. It was just based on very, task-specific performance. So incentives didn't really drive towards creating the culture that the organization wanted. It was just more incentivizing, did work get done, rather than is there an intentional strategy I want to build towards and incentivize. And so in an environment like that, what did come of it was there was some significant turnover, in that environment. Very expensive turnover. And that's just the consequence of bad practice when it comes to trying to maintain intentional culture across global teams. Inconsistent culture in different places results into inconsistency of outcomes and results. And that's an extremely tough thing to manage. It makes managing the business a tough thing to manage. So us as Acme Corp, as we expand, we want to avoid these bad practices so that they don't drive inconsistency, which makes the business much tougher to manage and makes developing talent much tougher, so on and so forth. Anything to add on some bad practices?
Scott has his hand raised.
Scott, go for it. You're on mute.
If I don't mute myself, I keep talking. So thank you. Yeah, I have a personal example for that. As you can see, I've got a UKG shirt on. I work for Fuse Workforce, and we are a UKG partner. So I still very much believe in the product and the company. But UKG was the outgrowth of the merger of Kronos and Ultimate Software. They both had a very caring and kind relationship with employees and with customers. And as a matter of fact, when the pandemic started, the then CEO, Aaron Ain, got in a meeting with everybody and said, if everything goes to hell in a handbasket, we have enough cash reserves. We can pay you all for 2 years, even if we don't do any business. I mean, that's about as kind as you get. It went from that to about 6 years ago, the day before the 4th of July weekend, it started to creep out because somebody had made the mistake of releasing to the purchasing and HR department directions to send FedEx labels to everybody that was going to get laid off the next week. So about 1,000 people got FedEx labels telling them, they could send their company equipment back without any news that any of this was happening. They'd plan on doing it the next week, but it was so poorly handled that the upshot of it was that once it's leaked, then they had to make an announcement. They were laying off 2,600 people. I was one of them. It was so badly mishandled, particularly for a company our taglines were at that time, people are our purpose and united, kind, and growing. And yet, a reduction in force of 2,600 people mishandled. It resulted in the CEO getting fired, and it resulted in all of the C-suite people either leaving on their own or being removed. So it was a really good example of what you're talking. You got to walk the talk, or it really damages things. And it's still something that, in representing the product, I have to sometimes fight that because people heard that they don't like that, and they shouldn't. It's not the right way to do business.
Yeah, and we probably don't have time for it today, but one of the questions I had for the audience was, who owns culture? And in your example, Scott, the CEO getting hit with the consequences. Ultimately the CEO owns culture, and so if something like that breaks down in culture and process, I think the hammer falls very appropriately there. And thanks for sharing that, right? Because Scott, I think your story and example kind of draws another point, is that things can change, right? An organization can go from driving good, consistent culture across global teams to not being consistent. And so having that visibility really matters, and measuring and making sure you're refining and retweaking and readjusting. It's kind of like going to chiropractor, right? Just getting realigned. That needs to happen. Every system, by its definition, needs to be maintained. And so that maintenance has to happen. Otherwise, breakdowns happen, right? Your car has to get serviced. Otherwise, it will break down, sooner than you want it to. But Scott, thank you for that story.
I think that's a great example of like the values on the wall didn't change, right? It's the behaviors in the organization that changed, and that drastically changed the culture overnight. And I think that's like HR. I don't believe HR owns culture. I'd have to get my soapbox out, Dominique, for that conversation. It is the CEO. But I do think that I think on that last slide, I think HR has the ability to impact the decisions that are made. And a lot of those things, we see those things coming, right? And we can carry the flag to the CEO and saying these decisions that you're making around all of these things are having an impact on culture and are going to have an impact on turnover and are going to have an impact on the bottom line and are going to have all of these impacts. And we're not responsible for culture, right?
Absolutely.
But we need to change these things because bad things are going to happen.
Absolutely.
You can't change culture from the middle.
No.
The CEO must own it. The CEO must own it. I think managers are a very important friction point to it. So you have to keep an eye on our managers translating that, or is it getting blocked somewhere at that level? But the CEO ultimately owns it, and should be held accountable to that. A case of a good practice. Global services firm, again, obfuscate names. They had a secondment program, global standards for delivery, regular international feedback. So not only in HQ, but base operations, but within the environment itself, and also international customers. Because I think it was, there's different types of. I think customers are extremely valuable to culture as well. I think who your customers are, what customers you choose to go after, how you choose to serve customers, and that standard of quality that you bring influences culture. And so I think customers as partners to culture is important. I think when it comes to maintaining international culture across global teams, one element that helps with that is if you're dealing with other global companies. So us as Acme Corp, if we're selling widgets and we're selling widgets to another global company that has, to John's point, been able to navigate local culture well, and by virtue of doing business with them, we're able to learn from their practices as we're serving them. I think that's something that this global services firm did very well, is that, globally they served global companies as well. And so they were kind of required to maintain consistency in order to serve customers well. So that forcing function from customers was super helpful because that consistency was required. So I think that was an important element as well. Any comments on this one?
My only comment, I know we're going to run short of time, is dealing with the time zones and language issues with regards to communication is probably the single greatest challenge that companies have. When you're dealing with a country that's tomorrow and 17 hours, and the staff, if it's a U.S. company expanding globally, you really need to think and plan very carefully about how the communications are delivered and when they're delivered to we'll call them offshore or global offices, operations.
That's an interesting point, and it makes me think of something that I saw in a TV show recently. I can't remember the name of the show, but it was about, I think it's morning news or something. But we're probably not far away from a live real-time translation AI that will make it appear that, if I'm giving a speech and there are people from 150 countries, literally it can appear that I'm speaking all those languages. How do you think that will impact communications and culture?
Very interesting.
I'm looking forward to it.
Very interesting. That would be that would be awesome, actually. Really personalize. Even not only just the local language, but the local dialect would be super interesting and hyper personal. It would show that the leader's being, extra thoughtful.
Unless of course it insults the local culture because it hallucinates like AI is known to.
hopefully, you got to buy the right tool. Yeah, hopefully it doesn't hallucinate and start saying, uh, $50,000 raises for everybody or something like that. That's not.
Yeah, you're gonna have to really be sure that the translation is what was
exactly.
being. The
Exactly.
hallucination part has to be
It's
solved.
pretty hard to do though if it's real time. I mean, because that's where we're heading, isn't it? That's where we're headed, isn't it?
What's said is said. I heard $50,000 bonuses for everybody. That's what I heard in my local dialect. I'm gonna sign up for that. As we wrap up, I know we're almost at time. I'm just gonna do some shameless plugs so that you and the audience are aware of how we could be helpful at Intramark. I'll just zoom by these, but I just want to open the last minute or so to questions. At Intramark, we help organizations get visibility into people factors that disrupt execution. And so if we're thinking about global expansion and maintaining executional excellence during major initiatives, it's very helpful. And it's a simple, confidential way for employees and leaders to hear each other in real time. And so really getting ahead of what's working, what's not working, or what could become a problem if left unspoken. This is the area that we specialize in, and we take a very unique approach to doing that. And so if you have any questions, there's just some examples of how we've helped others. I have more examples, but if you have any questions at all, feel free to scan this on your screen, leads to our website, or if you want to book a demo with me, I'm glad to give you a demo. But wanted to open it up we're at time, but Michelle, how do you want to handle this? More than glad to have questions.
I just want to say really quickly, this has been approved for one global HRCI recertification credit. The number is 730280. It's in the chat too if you want to grab that using the 3 little dots up on the top right. Next week, we're not going to have a meeting, so that meeting is off, and we'll be picking back up on February 18th. We're going to have an open mic talking about your top 3 priorities for 2026. So that will be an open discussion for February 18th. So next week, clear your calendar. We're not going to be here, and you got a day off.
Where are you going skiing next week?
I'm not. The boys have a half day, so I have to pick them up at noon. So can't be in 2 places at once. I'm trying to clone myself, but it's not. I haven't figured it out yet. So, but yeah, if you have questions, feel free to hang on and ask Dominique some questions. Otherwise, have a great week.
Thank you. This was fabulous information. Really, really thought-provoking.
Thank you everyone for participating. Really appreciate the time.
Take care.
Thanks, Dominique, and thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Dominique.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of minutes, so we can, if anybody wants to stay on and just jabber and relate experiences, I'm up for that.
I am here.
I do have to pop, so I will let you guys stay, and I'll catch you later. But thank you, Dominique. I appreciate you. Good to see you,
Michelle.
John.
Thank you again.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye.
Well, Dominic, Kelly, is Kelly able to have a face with the name? Maybe not on her phone. Thanks, Dominique. And can you hear me all right?
I can hear you perfectly. I can
Okay,
hear you.
Good.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, we were talking about cultural issues. You're on mute, Kelly.
Oh, yep.
I always call that a blessing when I'm on mute. People don't have to listen to me.
That's not true.
But
yeah.
When you're talking about these issues, we were one of the first forerunners into China for apparel way back when. And the kinds of things that stuck with me and I carry with me to this day are the nightmares and surprises of just trying to do simple things that are culturally normal there and abnormal elsewhere, in here maybe. Simple things like, could you give a sample, a swatch of material to our potential customers, and it would come in with holes in it, rips, tears, because their idea of a sample was something they don't use, they won't use. That was their definition, right? The other was quality control in the manufacturing process, unless the manager or the quality control person was on your payroll, they weren't your quality control person. And we're talking about really simple things that you discover and are surprised at. And they're only examples of eliminate surprises. There are plenty of people who have been doing this for a long time, and nothing can change like what's happening to Hong Kong, as the Chinese take it over. They said they would, they are. But the other thing I mentioned was benefits. I mean, if you're operating in Costa Rica, you have to have medical present and regular checkups weekly in your facility. You have to. It's mandated. And so, what do you call what is a benefit when it comes to a country and a people when their healthcare is free versus what you run into here? So all of those things across the board. I guess I really irritated Kelly. Anyway, I wanted to thank you. It was great meeting you, at least virtually.
Likewise.
I will keep you in mind when I hear things. We are not in need of anything, but the beauty of networking is you just never know.
Absolutely. And part of this as well is how we could be helpful to you as well. If we, hear of any opportunities that we could send your way, anything that I can be helpful with as far as just questions, or maybe someone in my network that I can connect you with, all of that's open too. So absolutely.
Yeah, technically I'm a consultant, but I'm a CXO consultant and advisor mentor to C-level execs and fractional. I do that. I spend the majority of my time growing a company called Individual Centricity, which is a security company, just now launching One True You. And there isn't much you can do that till you understand what we do, but it's finally an answer to the horrors of the lack of the band-aided, the multiple locked, broken gates that we all deal with day in and day out, and companies do too. So that's that's where I spend the majority of my time, and eventually we'll need customer service offices throughout the world. Now, don't have a need. So it's all, I like to say we all sell. We're all marketing, this is getting off the ground, and we all do whatever we can do to get it going. So there.
Well, John, let's definitely keep in touch. I really appreciate you sharing this time with us. Please don't be a stranger. I really appreciate, meeting you and the team and getting opportunities to, share some information and our story. So I really appreciate it, John.
Well, you too. Thank you. It was very good. I would compliment you on eliciting the kinds of responses and feedback and comments. That was excellent. Let's connect on LinkedIn. I guess that's the easiest way to do it now, even though I am quickly becoming a non-fan of LinkedIn, but it's still what is, right? So,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
you can find me at on LinkedIn. John Hagen, Hagen, and there are others, but I haven't been duplicated yet, even with a.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Yeah.
You'll find me. Look, I don't know what I can send you a link, but
no, I'll find you. I'll find you. I'll find you right
and
now.
I'll find you too. St-Fleur?
You got it.
Okay. Very
awesome.
good.
John, thank you so much, and look forward to keeping in touch with you.
And thank Michelle.
Likewise.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.